All right, welcome everyone. This is the Hyannis Public Library hosting author Thomas Flynn today, author of Bikeman. We are doing the event When the Towers Fell, Cape Authors Experience through Bikeman. Mr. Tom Flynn is a Harwichport resident. He joins us today from the comfort of New York. He's been doing a number of events this week on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and he is here to do a reading with us for his epic poem Bikeman, which he has masterfully put together. He'll be giving you his story, his experience, and reading a number of selections from the piece as well. If anyone has any questions during the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat. We will be doing a Q&A feature at the end of the event, and I will be going through each and every one of them to make sure that they are all answered. All right, Tom, take it away.
Thank you. I think one of the questions is, how did I end up in New York on 9/11? Well, the first easy part of that is I lived there. And the second part is I happened not to be on the road. I was a producer at CBS News for years and years, but I was at the evening news at that time. And that job took me everywhere imaginable, many places around the world, certainly all over the country. And I bet half my life was on the road. The surprise to me was that I was actually home when this happened, because if I had been in Dubuque or Des Moines, with apologies to those wonderful cities, I would have been furious. The biggest story by far in my career happened in my backyard. So I felt fortunate to be at home. I was outdoors. We had a backyard in Greenwich Village, which is maybe a mile or so from the towers. Having a cup of coffee, reading the paper, getting ready to go into work. 10 o'clock was start time for CBS for all of the broadcasts, because our show was on late. We didn't get off work until 7, so it was a 10 to 7 day. So I was sitting there having a cup of coffee when the plane went over my garden low. Now I couldn't see it. September, you can look up, the trees are still in full bloom. So while I couldn't see the plane, I heard it very low, and it was gunning. It was on a runway type gunning. This was no mistake. I was sure, for that reason, but also for another, that this was an attack. This was no small plane that you heard reported hitting the tower. It was no mistake. That plane was doing exactly what it set out to do. And you could tell that just sitting there. The other event was in 1993, when a guy in a Ryder truck tried to take down the World Trade Tower by blowing up the building. He drove the Ryder truck with a bomb inside of it. The building didn't go down then. I was at 48 Hours at the time. We talked about doing that as a story for our 48 Hours, throwing out the one we had planned. We were on Thursdays. At that time, this was a Tuesday, and we could have done it. We turned around stories in 48 hours. But we thought, before we heard later, that it was maybe a gas main break. There hadn't been a terrorist attack on New York, ever. So we thought it was just a gas main break, some sort of accident, a good local story, but not for a national broadcast. So we passed. The next morning, we knew what had happened. It was a terrorist attack, the first terrorist attack. This is 1993. And I said to a buddy of mine there at work, I'm not making that mistake again. So here comes the second attack on the World Trade Towers. And I told Nancy, my wife, I said, I'm going down there, we're under attack. So I I got around New York on a bicycle. It's the smartest thing you could do. It's also a wonderful thing to do here on the Cape. But I got on my bike. I headed down there quickly because I knew that under a situation like this, there was going to be a police cordon keeping everybody out, which is what happened. So I wanted to get there before that happened. And it turns out that not only was there a police line on Houston Street, if you know New York City, it's about, maybe a half a mile north of the towers. The towers were at the very south part of Manhattan Island. So this Houston Street was maybe a half a mile or so north of that. And I managed to get past that before any cops, before any military. There was military there soon after. And got to the tower. I was looking for a cameraman. I didn't have a crew, obviously. And this is 20 years ago. There were no cell phones. So you couldn't just turn your cell phone on and take pictures. So I was looking for a cameraman. I found one. I found the cameraman from the Merrill Lynch Corporation. Their building was maybe 100 yards in back of where the trade tower was, the South Tower, which by this time was also hit. That's the interesting thing. I was maybe halfway down riding my bike toward the trade towers. The north was the one that was hit first, and it was burning. The south was hit as I was riding. I didn't see the plane come around and hit it from in back, but I did see that fireball burst out from the north part of it. And that just confirmed for me exactly what I thought. This was a terror attack. 2 planes into those buildings was not a mistake. I sped up. I was sure I was going to get stopped, but I got through. So there I was. Found my cameraman, hired him on the spot, and he said, "Okay, man." He was an island guy, and he was happy to be with CBS because the police, as they arrived, started pushing everybody away from the building. And a good thing too, because when that building came down, anybody under it, anybody near it really, as huge as that building was, would have gotten caught in it and killed. And in fact, there were 2 other journalists down there that I know of, again, who made it to the towers. I'm guessing that they happened to be there on assignment for some reason, because there's no good reason to go there for a journalist on a regular day. Both of them were killed in the collapse of the tower. So I feel fortunate, of course, to survive, but I was able to tell the story. I wrote it up, as you know, in a book called Bikeman. So that's how I got there, and felt lucky to do so. I've pulled some selections here. I thought you might like to hear. One of the things that people remember vividly, I'm sure you all remember if you were living through it, those scenes on television. One indelible one for me too, though I didn't see it live, was the pictures of the building collapsing. The first one fell, was the South Tower, which is the one I happen to be standing next to, and primarily shooting. That building was, when it crashed, set up a black cloud. That's what you might remember, that huge dust black cloud that engulfed the whole downtown area when the suddenness of that building collapsing. What I'm able to do, and what I thought you might be interested in hearing, was not the vision of that cloud from outside, but what was it like inside. I'm guessing that that might be interesting. And it'll give you some sense of what this poem is about and the experience that I had. So this starts, maybe a third of the way through the poem here, as the building is collapsing. The growling, lofty tower wall expands. The concrete skin bellies out like the throat of a frog about to croak. It stretches elastically until it bursts. The frail, flawed tower vomits its guts out high above us. In slow motions, the broken skin, like semi-liquid chunks drifting wood on a serene bay, floats outward and then pauses. It is a murderous still life in the air above, detached but not yet descending. For me now, time dissembles, distance deceives. That monster wall, airier than air itself, dances in broken parts, waiting a moment. Then, amid the screaming of those around me who realize the tower is collapsing, I watch the chunks gather up and begin to drop toward us. They come roaring down, airy no more. They howl toward us like a pack of wild coyotes on a full moon in search of a soft target. They land like mortars, like cannon shots on the ground around us. The sound echoes from Liberty Street, across the harbor to Liberty Isle, up numbered avenues and streets and fields, to ranches and to lands at the ends of the farthest earth. So then, I and the people I was with, they were a pod of 4 or 6 ambulance men who were there waiting on Liberty Street for something to do. There wasn't anything for an ambulance person to do because people are either dead or alive. There weren't a lot of injuries. We all run into a parking garage. Remember, the building is collapsing, but that cloud of dust has yet to approach us. It will. It feels the way the cave must have felt to ancient man. Sturdy walls on all sides, protection from the frightful, from the dangerous, from the lethal outside. For a moment, I can see where we are. Our sanctuary is a parking garage, offering protection from the murdering rain. I tarry briefly, turning to our cave mouth to gaze back. It is a boiling brimstone avalanche, cascading from the tower, billowing up towards us. A blaspheming wave, tumbling walls, darkness. It looks as if thousands of horses and millions of soldiers are stampeding across a desert. Threatening clouds rise at their hooves and heels, pushing the frightened air ahead. I hear now from deep inside our cave, run, run, run. The winds of hell scream in, a desert storm, a gritty, superheated scirocco. It is lightless, instant. Only shadows, forms move before my eyes. It is less than night and less than day. I feel a reverberating silence. It is my new world. No longer do I see things as they are, but as through gauze. It is a miasma, a shaded reality.
I also have a question for you, just to cut in for a second.
Sure.
Do you remember how many people you were with? Can you describe the folks that were around you?
Yes.
Were you just looking out at this happening as it was happening? What were you feeling?
They were this was one ambulance crew that I was with. There was a line of ambulances on Liberty Street, maybe 8, 12, maybe more. They'd come from all over. This one was from Brooklyn, interestingly. But that group, I had been talking with them, asking them questions and trying to gather news. And when the building fell, I was with them, and we all ran to the same place, to this parking garage. It was up Liberty Street, a hill, but maybe 100 feet, nothing, no great run. And then into this parking garage. I'm guessing there were 6 of us, I think. It was the crew of this one ambulance, so there couldn't have been that many people. Maybe 4 or 5, like that. And we were the only ones to duck into this. There were other people who survived. They ran other places. In fact, I found out later that the cameraman who I had hired ran into a deli that was just down the street. Where we ran was toward the west a little. He ran toward the south, ran into a deli, and you hear on the videotape, "Shut off the gas, shut off the gas." The guy who owned the deli was scared that with this calamity, that it might break the gas and explode the deli. But it was as lightless in that deli as it was where I was. You couldn't see a thing. I bet we were there for 20 minutes, a half an hour, although it felt like forever. And I was pretty sure I wasn't going to get out of there. It was hot, gritty. It was, you could, like gravel. It was not huge chunks of gravel, but like a gravel, like, and that's what it was at. It was what was left of the building. But hot, it had been burning. And that was the heat, very hot. So it was dark, it was hot, it was gritty. You breathed this in, it was in your eyes and your nose, it was in everything. There was no hiding from that. And it was super, super driven. Those clouds moved fast and pasted us all. The pictures you've seen of people coming out of there covered in dust, it didn't drift on them. It was fired on them, like with a gun. So the chances of my getting out of there were slim until one of those wonderful EMTs. If you're ever stuck in trouble, find an EMT, they'll get you out. I hear a window break and then a voice. Fresh air here. Life-giving cool air rushed up, overtaking the stale darkness. I breathe again, not the stifling, heated grit that packs into me, but a blast as from a freezer. It must be from the outside. Urgently, I roll my bike toward the air. Voices jumble, alerting others. This way, come, here, this way. And then I hear a voice that I came to know. Come on, Bikeman, said the EMT. And I followed. The jumbled words of the save pull me toward the cool air, toward the broken door, toward freedom. I roll through from the hell I didn't expect to escape, but into a purgatory of lost souls, I among them. We are released out of the grasp of the pressing blackness, but the eyes have no need to adjust. It is dark outside, as dark as it was in the cave I left behind, but different. We walk in a rouge grayness, and street lights blink on. They think it is night. The lights do not help. They glimmer like cat's eyes in a black alley, revealing nothing. It is less than night and less than day. That ambulance man, Avi, he was the guy who called me Bikeman. We didn't know anybody's names. I heard Avi over walkie-talkies. They would talk to each other, the ambulance guys over their walkie-talkies, and I heard his name. So I knew his. He didn't know mine. He just called me Bikeman, which is how it got his name. After we got out, and you still couldn't see anything. It was a different sort of darkness. Like I say, it was a rouge grayness. There was a color to it, but it was still plenty dark. And those streetlights, which come on automatically when it's nighttime, they came on. So I did my best to get out of there. And I was walking with them, the ambulance guys. Are there 6 of us or so? Something like that. We walked past a building, although I didn't know it was a building at the time, but I saw something happen. I saw a motion. It was a door opening up. And some of the people who were inside this building, and it was a lobby, said, "Over here, come." And they pulled at us, pulled our arms, and tried to pull us what they thought was to safety. But I was not going to get into another building. I was outside finally, and I wasn't going to get there. The ambulance guys did go in, but I was trying to get to the river. The Hudson River is on the west side of Manhattan, and that's where I was headed, although I didn't know where I was. So I said just in general, there were a lot of folks around. I said, "Which way is the river?" And one guy said, it's this way. And he pointed, which I could see. And I thought I took his advice and I headed in that direction, and he was right. But I thought later, I said, how did he know? I mean, you couldn't see, I couldn't see, but he knew, and I got there. The shroud lingers. I ride along the riverside, the lone smoky tower belching more darkness. It looms above as I am forced to approach this threat again, to get around a man-made cove, a small harbor where sailboats that only yesterday bobbed gaily but now ride in silhouettes of dust. I watch a seagull who accompanies me. He floats on the wind on crooked wings, head down, eyes staring and perturbed, mystified, wondering, what have we done here? After lingering a time, he lifts off. I move off with the others silently, along the esplanade, tracking the river along its bank. We walk soundlessly our small parade, as if in woolen socks, as if on the moon. We walk on a blanket of death, mortal silence. We made our way along this esplanade, along the river, and got away from the North Tower, the burning, still burning tower. And I was up, I don't know, maybe now 5-10 blocks north of what we came to know as Ground Zero. And there were others making the same pilgrimage out of there. all looking pretty much the same as I did, covered with dust. And this is what happened. I join a group of calm, bewildered, meandering, eerie sleepwalkers, stumbling away from the foul, wretched place. We turn and proceed uptown through these canyons of woe. It is a slow, staggering march out of hell, a long, languid, lugubrious snake of sadness. We have aged past old in that caldera created of spite and hate. We did not live through it. We just did not die. I see it in the faces and the footfalls of all who move away from the burning fury of the still standing tower. Their feet do not bounce with a sprightly young gait, nor do they hurry with horror-inspired haste, but they scuff along like an old farmer leaving his barn at dusk. They step with the shuffle of the aged, their faces absent challenge, absent awe. Amid a chorus of wailing eulogy, the survivors move away. I move with the living, yet I carry the dead. I carry them on a funeral march beyond the September morning. This forever September. That'll give you some sense of what it was under that black cloud. You, Lauren, wonderful Lauren, also were wondering about writing Bikeman. That's interesting, and it's related to the Cape. I had taken notes. My morning after that, I went right to CBS News where I worked. They knew I was where I'd been because of the dust. And one of the executives said, "Would you go on with Dan? Tell him what you saw." I said, "Sure," which I did. And that's still available to see. I told Dan what I saw of the building collapse and other details. After that, I went up to my office, which was one floor above. And I did what in the military they call a data dump. I just started writing all of the things I remembered of the morning so that I wouldn't forget them. It was about 5 pages, some phrases, some just words. The seagull was in there. All of the information that I could remember from the event, which is what, an hour before. So it was about 5 pages, single spaced. I got that done. I set it aside. And I went to work. I had to work for about 3 straight weeks. We were on the air 24 hours for a while, and then we were on a lot, as I'm sure you remember. And then my wife said, "You have to take a break. You have to stop." And I said to my boss, I said, "I got to take a break." They said, "Go, get out of here. Don't come back for a week." My sister lived on the Cape, and she said, "Get up here, come up here. Not a better place in the face of the earth." And so Nancy and I drove up, and there's a sweet story involved in that. We went across the Sagamore Bridge and we're driving on Route 6, and there's overpasses, as you all know, on Route 6. My car had New York plates, and usually that's, the hated New Yorkers, the hated Yankees, and the hated New York Giants, right? But not that day. There were people on the bridge with signs welcoming us, And when they saw the New York plates, they started to clap. That was very special. So in no time at all, Nancy started looking at the real estate section, and we had bought a house. This was September, of course. We closed on a house in February, and we've been there for, well, pretty much 20 years. Maybe 5 years after, or thereabouts, I pulled those notes back out and I started looking at them. And I said, well, I've got to do something with these. Now, meanwhile, I've been reading various things, one of which was Dante's Inferno, which I had read in high school, and I remember it fondly. But to be honest, I didn't remember it at all. I thought, I got to reread that. So I was rereading the Inferno as I was mulling my notes from that morning. And so I would take a bike ride every morning on your wonderful rail trails. And what happened was daydreaming, dissociation. I started the story of my morning started to meld into the Inferno, the rhythms of the Inferno and the language of the Inferno. And I was writing this in my head while riding my bike on the Cape. I'd get back home and I'd write it all down as fast as I could to try to remember what I had written in my head. And doing that every day, I ended up after about 6 months with the first draft of what became Bikeman. It took me a year and a half of rewriting, I'll tell you, to get it to what it is today, which is not a big surprise if any of you are writers. The rewriting is crucial, of course, but it takes the longest amount of time. So that Cape relationship was very strong. I wrote this pretty much mostly on the Cape. The rewriting was both in New York and on the Cape, but the first draft of it was on the Cape. That's how that came to be. Let me see, I've got some of Lauren's questions.
Well, I actually have another one for you.
Shoot.
Were you riding that on the bike you had in New York that day? Was that the same bike?
No. Oh,
No. What happened to that bike? Do you know?
New York story. Yeah, I know. Maybe 3 days after, I used the bike. I'd leave home, go down to what became known as the pit, which is what was left of the towers. And they were swarming with people, first responders, to try to dig early on to try to find their colleagues, and later on just to recover them. But I would go down to try to find a story that I would do for the evening news that day. Very few people could get down there, but since I lived as close, I wasn't barred from going down there, and I went down on my bike, that same bike. Now, at one point, before heading down there, I ran into the deli that's around the corner from where I live to grab a coffee. So I went in. How long does that take? I poured the coffee, poured milk in it. I don't take sugar. Paid Lynn, who owned the place, went out. The bike was gone. Gone. Somebody had stolen my bike. So no, it wasn't the same bike. And I'm thinking, whoever stole that bike isn't going to get much of a bike, because that thing, as inundated with it as I was, that bike had dust all over it. Does that answer your question?
Hopefully, yeah, I was going to say, hopefully it was somebody who ended up needing the bike that day to get somewhere for whatever reason. You never know.
I hope it was somebody who was there where I was and really needed it more than I did. Yep. I agree. But
Yeah.
no, it was a different bike. In fact, the bike that I wrote as I rode is still here. It's still in,
Hey.
yeah. So that didn't get stolen yet.
Yet. I don't think it's going to on the Cape. I don't know about New York.
Yeah, no, I'm not bringing it to New York. I do have a new one. The new one is 20 years old. That hasn't been stolen, but I lock it up everywhere.
I would too after
Yeah.
that.
Sure.
So I think I'm sure you probably have some more to say, but something that you had said earlier was that you carry the dead forever on this forever September morning. How has 9/11 stayed with you since this? Because
Don't
for
forget-
me,
Yeah.
for me reading through this, it almost feels, and you kind of mentioned it, this is how you kind of processed everything, because you had these notes, you have this stuck in your head. Writing Bikeman was how you got it out and how you worked through it again every day, like you said.
Yes, I didn't do that consciously, but
Mhm.
inevitably, yes. My daughter said there's absolutely no question in her mind that just the writing of it was cathartic, was helping me to get, past it all. Don't forget that when the building collapsed and burned and all of that dust, there were thousands of people who were burned up in it. And in my mind, that dust wasn't just building dust. Those were dust of people. The ashes to ashes, dust to dust. So I'll tell you, let me read you the very end of this. The dead from here are my forever companions. I am their pine box, their marble reliquary, their bronze urn, the living, breathing coffin they never had, their final resting place without a stone. So yeah, I do carry them, and I am aware of that. I don't think about that every day. I don't think about 9/11 every day. But these days, this time of year, I do. Yep. Does that answer your question?
I would say yes, it does.
Okay.
I think for me, the most poignant parts of your writing when I went through the epic poem was when you described the human moments, like some of the individuals that you saw in their last moments on this earth, and some of the scenes just passing by, because it was, I don't want to say it was a dissociation, but there's a separation between you and what's happening, but you're also recording it at the same time. And I feel, especially as someone, I was not in New York. I was a young person at the time that this happened.
You're still a young person, dear heart.
Yes. I was a very young person at the time, but I think there's levels of separation that we all have, and reading your first person accounts and hearing your first person accounts reminds me, and I feel like this is why it's important that we continue to talk about 9/11, to continue telling these stories, because even though this tragic thing happens, in remembering it, it's important, because not only were there people that were involved who lived, there were people who were involved who were injured or have had illness since this point, or who never made it past that day. It's
Right.
It's important, and I feel like your writing definitely does some of that justice.
There's one regret that I have in all of this. And it was what happened after in the city. I'm guessing that it happened all over the country, but I wasn't all over the country, so I don't know. And there was a unifying, this just, I have a dog. This event brought us all together for a time. And you'd see it when you'd ride a subway. Lake, cool. You'd see it when you rode a subway, walking out on the sidewalk. Our house was near a hospital, and there would be people who would be out for a walk in the hospital, and they'd look at you. So this is what I wrote. Those I look back at me, mute and solemn, but with an openness, a welcoming I had not known before in the city, as if to say, we are one now. We must look out for each other, care for each other. We are one now, fellow citizens in a city crushed by anguish and agony. We are one now, kin in the chaos, as we silently scuff along. That was wonderful. And we've lost that as a country. And my regret is that it's gone. And how wonderful would it be to have that feeling back?
I have to say, I share the same sentiment. It's indescribable the way that people came together during that time, and it's unique because of what happened and because of just the events of history that led to the response that we had. Do you have any other sections that you would like to share with us from your poem?
They may come up depending on the questions.
Okay.
If you've got any questions, there may be.
Okay. So at this time, I would invite everyone, please type your questions into the chat. I see that we already have one down there, but please send them and I will read them out to Tom, and that way we can go through everyone soon. The first one that I have, it's a question. It says, were you able to stay connected to the people that you were with that day? Do you know them? Have you met them again?
Unfortunately, I never saw them again. I never saw Avi again. I never saw the ambulance people again. I got busy. I'm sure they got busy. I did get word back that Avi remembered me and he wished me well through an intermediary. And I sent word back to him, basically saying, I hope he's good, and thanked him for getting me out of there. But no, the cameraman disappeared. He's long gone. I didn't see him. I haven't seen him. I don't know if he's alive, to be honest with you. When the building collapsed, he and I split, and there was one fella who was there that I did connect up with later, though I didn't meet up with him while I was there. And his name was Captain Jonas. He was a fire captain. And he had in his truck, 6 truck, they were from Chinatown. It was one of the first trucks there. They were really close. Chinatown is right near Ground Zero. So they got there before the second plane hit. And they were going up into the tower to try to rescue people, to try to put the fire out, which they trained to do. I asked about that. They are actually trained to fight high-rise fires, and in fact, World Trade Tower fires. So his story was amazing. I did meet up with him later to do a story for Dan Rather on actually the anniversary, the first anniversary of 9/11. He told me the story. I met with his whole crew and a lady. Do you have time for this? It's a wonderful story. So they were up maybe 60 stories up, maybe 70, something like that. And they carry an enormous amount of stuff. These guys are in great condition. So they'd gotten all the way up to there, and he heard something. Jonas, Captain Jonas. And he turned to the rest of his crew and he said, we cannot complete this mission. Let's go back down. But on each floor, they scoured the floor to find out if there was anybody still there. And on one floor, down maybe 40th floor or so, they found an older woman. She was a secretary for one of the businesses way up high, and she'd been marching her way down. She was in a chair, and she said, I'm not going any farther. You boys go. And they said, we're not going until you go with us. And she said, no, no, no. So they threw her over her shoulder in the fireman's carry and carried her. She wasn't going to go on her own. They were going to take her. So they got down to the 5th floor landing. This is on the staircases. And she worked her way off the shoulder and she said, I can't go any farther. You boys go ahead. I am not going one step farther. And they said, if you're not going, we're not going, as a way to kind of talk her into it. At that point, they started to hear what one guy described as like a railroad train on the tracks. Click, 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 then faster, click, 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 click. These were the floors on top of them coming down on them. And they all thought, well, this is it. Some thought of their family, some prayed. They were pretty sure that that was the end of them. And then the building finished its collapse. And Joe was alive. Jonas, Captain Jonas was still alive. And he said, sing out, Truck 6. And they all called back, every one. They were all still alive, every one. And the secretary, she was there too. All around them, this building had collapsed and fallen out. You know, it went, I don't know, hundreds of yards out because of the size of it and the power of it. I'm talking about the carcass of the building. And one of the firefighters said, look up. And there, a little hole of emptiness showed that blue sky. They saw the sky. Here they were inside the building 1 minute, and they saw the blue sky. So they called her our guardian angel. If they had gone one more floor, they would have been dead. If they had gone out of the building, they would have been dead. The only way they survived was staying on the 5th floor landing, which is where she said, we're not moving. So I did see Joe Jonas after.
So if I can ask a question, was he one of the people that you talked to and covered the story? Because this sounds familiar to me. Was this?
I did a piece on it afterwards. Yep. He and the rest of them. Some of them never able to go back to work. It was that traumatic for them. Yeah, that's not mine exclusively, but yeah, that was a story that I did among others. Sure.
Okay. And then, do you remember any of the other stories that you did cover? And are there any of them that particularly stuck with you in addition to that story, obviously?
Yeah, there were others. One of them, which just happened because of firefighters, because this is the way they work. And going down to the pit every morning, looking for a story, one morning I started to see what formed up really as a bucket brigade. I'm sure you remember camp, a bucket brigade. You take buckets of water, you pass them along a line so that they get to the end. What they were doing was filling buckets, anything they could find, work buckets, plastic buckets, anything they could find, with the rubble trying to dig for their colleagues. Again, they were mostly firefighters, but there were other people who showed up, drove down West Street there, trucks from, I mean, there were people from out of state, way across the country showed up just to help. But the bucket brigade, and nobody arranged that. Nobody set that up. Nobody said, okay, now we're going to do a bucket brigade. Okay, everybody, you Fritz over there. No, they just set it. They just went and did it. And I thought that was amazing. This was how much a firefighter works and lives for his colleagues. They were trying to save lives. And they did save some. There were some people, as remarkable as it sounds, who were pulled out of there, not just Joe Jonas and his guys, but others. So yeah, that was, to me, an amazing thing. The other, it was a story that was done, and I did it, was the story of the passive alarms, the pass alarms that all the firefighters carried. If they were immobile for a certain amount of seconds, 30, I think, the passive alarm would screech. It was a whistle, a haunting, sharp, attention-grabbing whistle. And that, the idea was, if you were, say, caught up in a room where there was smoke and passed out, they would come in and get you. There were hundreds of passive alarms, pass alarms, going off at the pit for days. They were all under there, and none of them would make it out. So that was the story.
That's definitely one that I haven't actually heard before. That's sad.
Yeah.
So another question that actually came in, and this one's personal and you don't have to answer it, but a lot of the survivors of 9/11 have experienced health problems because of the dust specifically, because you breathed it in, because it was on you, because it was asbestos and other materials from this building.
Right.
And somebody was wondering if you personally have experienced any side effects from this, because you were covered in it too.
A lot of people are interested in this. Isn't that interesting? My particular problems are what they call GERD, gastroesophageal acid reflux disease, RD. It's what you have when you eat too much hot sauce. But I have it all the time. And so I have medication to take for that. And also there's what they call rhinosinusitis. The sinuses were affected again by the dust. So yeah, those are issues. I mean, a lot of people ended up with cancer and worse. So I consider myself lucky.
I think also I'm kind of curious, with that in mind, do you remember how long it was until the dust cloud left? Because with that, like that amount of building material that was there, I'm sure it hung in the air for days. Do you remember about how long that took to go away? Like just walking out of your house?
It was days. And it wasn't so much the dust cloud that you could see, not that dense dust cloud that you could see, but you could smell. The pit burned and burned and burned for days. And that burning sent, because now the wind was coming from the south. So that wind came to my house. In fact, it wrecked the filter in my air conditioner, which I turned on to try to clear the air. Day after day after day, we could smell the burning pit. So the dust, not as much, but the smell never stopped. I don't know, 10 days, I've lost track, but it went on for days and days.
Did it have like a particular smell? Because it was metal and paper and office supplies and everything.
Well, you'll forgive me for the poetry of it, but to me, it was the smell.
Okay, the next question that we have, someone asks, do you do anything special on 9/11 each year? Or around the time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I try to do nothing. I walk my dog. My wife and I will go out and have dinner maybe. I don't do much, but occasionally when walking the dog was it last year or the year before? Maybe it was the year before. I was stunned to see much the same reaction on people. Now it was Greenwich Village. These are people who lived through it as I did, not maybe right there, but pretty close. There was some of that I referred to earlier, some of that looking out for one another, and a much more generous spirit in people. Quiet, it's always quiet on the streets. There's not a lot of, I'm talking about people who are residents and have been through all of this. It's somber is what it is. It's the lights go on. Do you know about the trade tower lights? Each year, they put together a pair of lights that shoot from the ground and go way up into the sky. They're blue, light blue, and they just disappear miles up there. And it's a representation of the two towers. They're on now, they're on tonight, they were on last night. And then they go through the 11th. So it's usually 3 days, maybe 4 that they're on. That's haunting. Just looking at that is haunting. It's lovely. It's a very special tribute. Quiet, appropriately so, but it's a beautiful tribute but a reminder.
And is that at ground zero, or is that okay, at the memorial?
I couldn't tell you exactly where it is, but it's within what ground zero is. That memorial is lovely. If you ever come to New York, I can't tell you much about the museum. I've only been inside it a couple of times and I get out as soon as I can. It gives me the willies. But up top is lovely. They've put where the buildings were, they've dug it out in what they call voids. And on all 4 sides of walls going down are waterfalls. But it's not washing over. They're little sprays, thousands of them all the way around. And it sings, there's a music to it. And then if the wind comes, they kind of play a song. It's interesting. But then they all come down to a black granite floor. And then that washes into another void, more black granite. And it's a depth of darkness that they did intentionally to an emptiness. And both the north and the south towers are where the footprints of these are. The names of the people who died in the buildings, and I think on the planes, are etched in the metal that goes all the way around these. And on the birthday of each person, someone puts a white rose in the etched out parts of their name. So if you ever go there and you see a white rose on one, it was that individual's birthday.
I've also heard that the metal that their names are on is actually heated. So any time of the year when you go, if you put your hands on it to touch someone's name, it will be warm to the touch.
Huh.
So, or so I've heard. I haven't been able
Sure,
to
you're
see
right.
it yet.
Yeah, you should. It's very moving. And there's stories there. There's a survivor tree. They have a lot of wonderful stories there. But if you skip the museum, which is the one you have to wait online for, this is just a park. You can go walk in. You don't have to wait online for it at all. You can skip the museum.
Okay. The next, and I think the last question that we have coming in from the chat, it's, did you know anyone, friends or colleagues that were in the tower that day? Like, did you have a personal connection, or were you just a journalist who knew you needed to cover this because this was big?
Right. I didn't know anybody there. I have met since I wrote this, lots of people who had friends, and many of them, sadly, family members. In fact, I did a reading when the original book came out, which was in 2008. This is the commemorative edition. I met at a reading up in Chatham, a lady who was sitting there quietly after I did some of the reading, and then we started chatting. The bookstore was at where the sidewalk ends, bookstore. We were sitting in a circle, and a lot of people were asking questions, and we were talking and cross-talking and all of that. And the woman sitting just to my right hadn't said a word, and it was notable. And I finally took a moment to say to her, because I wanted to include everybody, tell me why you're here. And she said, because my friend here, she pointed to her friend next to her, said I had to come. I said, why was that? She said, this is the first time I've done anything about 9/11. That's 7 years after the event. She had avoided anything to do with 9/11 for 7 years. And I listened, and she said, my son was in the building, and they didn't find anything of him, not even a fingernail. So I haven't known anybody. There were people who worked at CBS who were on the top of the North Tower, because we had a broadcast antenna there, and they died. But I didn't know them very well.
Thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
This is important for all of us to continue talking and remembering and sharing these stories, because there are so many stories that we also haven't heard. And it's, in some way, this has touched every one of us in different ways, in different capacities. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for everybody who came. Very
Yes.
great.
So I would also like to let everybody know, Mr. Flynn has very graciously signed many copies of the book. If anyone is curious or would like to purchase a copy for their own, they're currently on sale in a bookshop in Sandwich called Titcomb's Bookshop, which I can provide the link in the chat here. They are selling for $11.99. So if you would like a copy of that, you can purchase one online, and they're signed by our very own author here. And I have to say, reading through it, really, it touches you. And this is not just me as the host saying this because I'm putting on an event. There are some sections that Mr. Flynn has humbly decided not to share with us that are haunting. So if this is something you would like to read, I suggest looking into it. And additionally, he also has a very new production that will be coming out relatively soon through the Irish Rep, which is a theater in New York. They are going to be doing an audio play, which I will also be sharing in the chat. This, I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's this week, correct? That it will be going live?
Saturday, September
Yes.
11th. Yep.
All right, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
This is interesting. Robert Cuccioli, who is a wonderful actor in New York, Tony Award-winning actor, did a play called Jekyll and Hyde on Broadway. And a brilliant actor, a New York-based actor. You probably wouldn't have heard of him unless you were here in New York, but he's fabulous. He put together a group of actors, there's 4 of them total, to read this as a play. And I haven't heard it yet, but I'm assuming that one of them is Avi, one of the ambulance people. I don't know all of what he did, but and they used the video, actually the audio of what I shot when I was down there as a bed. So the audio of this play, it's an audio play. It's not a video play that they're going to be streaming. Uses the real audio from 9/11, the stuff that I shot that happened then, and including, I'm assuming, the audio I got when the building collapsed. So I don't know what all they've done. I haven't seen it, heard it yet, but it should be great. Bob, he was the producer of it as well as the lead. He said it's fabulous. So, and I'm sure it is. Anything he does, and anything the Irish Rep does, by the way, they're down on 22nd Street, 6th Avenue. That's a great, if you like really good New York theater, think of the Irish Rep. They're great.
All right, I know I'm going to be checking that out for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, is there anything else that you would like to share with us before parting this evening? This has been fantastic.
I'm really grateful that everybody would take the time today, not a beach day, but thank you for coming.
All right. Thank you again to everybody who is here. This has been a wonderful experience. If you're interested, this will be going up online after the fact. So I will be sharing the link and anything in the chat that I have shared with you in an email after this event. If you have any questions, you are absolutely welcome to contact me. My name is Lauren. You can contact the library directly and let us know if you have any feedback or anything. And thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Lauren.